The 50th floor of Granite Point Industries always smelled faintly of cold steel and unrealized ambition. I had spent 16 years breathing that air, shaping billion-dollar alliances for a company that rarely remembered to spell my name correctly on internal memos. As director of cross-market integration, I didn't have a glamorous title, but in a firm obsessed with acquisitions, I was the hinge everything swung on. That morning, the skyline looked fractured through the glass, like the city itself already sensed the disaster coming. I was final reviewing the last negotiation protocols for a $3.7 billion merger with Vespera Dynamics when the boardroom doors burst open, not knocked, not opened, breached. In swept Lena Mercer, the new CEO's niece, freshly imported from a consulting firm her family practically owned, 26, unseasoned, and carrying the confidence of someone who had never once been told no. She didn't look at the view. She looked at me, or rather at the button on my blazer. "Clarina Scott," she said, like reading a complaint form. "We need to discuss your violation. Immediately." Violation, I blinked. My suit was immaculate, my heels polished, my presentation flawless. She lifted the employee manual like a holy scripture. "Your black and gold buttons are non-standard. All senior liaisons must adhere to the monochrome dress requirements for client-facing operations." The analysts outside froze mid-keystroke. "Lena," I said calmly, "we finalize a multi-billion-dollar merger in 48 hours. This is not the time." "No," she snapped. "This is exactly the time. Standards matter. And if you can't follow the basics, how can we trust you with anything bigger?" The absurdity tasted metallic on my tongue. Then she said it. "You're terminated. Effective immediately. Pack your things. Security will escort you out." For a heartbeat. Everything went silent air. Lights, breath. But underneath the shock, a strange clarity surfaced. She had no idea what she'd just done. She didn't fire a replaceable employee. She fired the only person who understood the hidden conditions buried in the Vespera contract, the only person holding the merger together, and in 48 hours. Everyone would feel the impact. Security didn't rush me. They knew the late nights. The merger salvaged in hour 23. The quiet negotiations that kept 3 different lawsuits from detonating over the past decade. The guards looked uncomfortable, almost guilty, as Lena strutted behind us like she had just executed a flawless military op instead of a career-ending blunder. "I want her out in 5 minutes," she ordered. I didn't bother looking at her. 5 minutes I had undone hostile acquisitions in less time. My office sat at the end of the executive hallway, a wall of glass overlooking the bay. A desk buried under color-coded files, and 3 binders that together had more power than our entire legal department: the Vespera Merger Atlas, the Compliance Crosswalk, and the Legacy Liabilities Addendum, the latter entirely handwritten because Vespera executives didn't trust digital records for certain legacy clauses. Only 2 people knew how to interpret them. I was one of the 2. I opened my drawer and removed the leather-bound notebook, where 16 years of nuance lived handshake agreements, cultural alliances, quiet guarantees that executives never put in writing, the kind of information Lena didn't even know existed. I slipped it into my bag. "Ms. Scott," said Mark, "the senior guard. Do you need more time?" I smiled faintly. "No, I'm exactly on schedule. Because in mergers, timing is everything." And Lena had just blown hers to ash. As I shut my computer down, I wiped my encryption keys not out of spite, but out of protocol. They hadn't asked for access to my data. They didn't understand the danger of incomplete files. They never asked why certain clauses were missing from the server copies. They assumed everything important lived in their cloud. Amateurs. When I stepped out, a hush fell over the floor. Analysts avoided eye contact. 2 senior managers stood frozen near the printers. Someone muttered, "Dear God," under their breath. Lena appeared again, arms folded so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Make sure she doesn't remove proprietary materials," she barked. "Mark didn't even check my bag." "She's clear," he said quietly. Lena scoffed. Useless. As we approached the elevators, I turned to her, watching the triumph on her face flicker like even she wasn't sure the ground was solid beneath her. Good luck. Lena, I said, pressing the elevator button. For your sake, I hope you understand the Vespera appendices. Her expression cracked. What appendices? Everything was on the drive. I stepped into the elevator, letting the doors close slowly enough for her to see my smile. The important parts never are. The doors sealed shut, descending. I felt the shock settle into something colder focus. Precision. She thought she'd humiliated me. Don't comment a word, unless you really find this story problematic. I didn't go straight home. People who panic go home. People who feel guilty go home. I walked 3 blocks to a small cafe overlooking the waterfront somewhere quiet. Somewhere no one from Granite Point ever bothered to notice, unless their favorite espresso machine was broken. I ordered a black coffee and took a seat by the window. At first, nothing happened. The city kept breathing. The tide kept rolling. The world kept mistaking calm for safety. Then my phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Then continuously like a trapped hornet. The first message was from Marcel, our head of compliance, Clarina. Did you authorize a transition of the Vespera files? Something is missing from the server. Call me ASAP. Missing no. They had exactly what Lena believed mattered: numbers, projections, sanitized summaries that looked impressive until someone tried to actually use them. The second text came from HR Director Owens, time-stamped 15 minutes after my termination. There seems to be a misunderstanding with your status. Please contact me immediately. We need clarification before the board meeting. A misunderstanding. That word always appears right before the iceberg surface tension snaps. I took a sip of my coffee. Bitter. Perfect. Then came the call. Not a number I recognized, but the area code belonged to Vespera's executive suite. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Clarina Scott speaking. A pause. Then a voice I knew too well, Elias Vesper. The COO and the only person in that empire who still believed in handshakes over digital signatures. Clarina, he said slowly. My team just attempted to speak with your replacement. She told us you were unavailable due to a compliance violation. I stared at the foam on my coffee. So that was the story Lena chose. Cowardly. But predictable. I'm not unavailable. I said, I was terminated this morning. The line went dead quiet. Terminated, Elias repeated, as if the word itself were a destabilizing chemical. And the board approved this. I let out a dry breath. They will discover it the same way you just did. A sharp exhale, half frustration, half disbelief. Clarina, your handwritten legacy clauses, where are they? They weren't sent over. They weren't part of the digital packet, I replied calmly. And your successor told us he stopped himself. I pictured him rubbing his forehead. She told us the appendices didn't matter. Of course she did. Elias, I said. You know better than anyone what happens if those terms are interpreted incorrectly. He didn't answer for several seconds. Then, quietly, the merger becomes legally unstable. Within hours, I confirmed. A chair scraped on his end. Papers shuffled. Raised voices echoed faintly through his line. Clarina! What exactly is happening over there? I looked out the window. The tide had shifted. Boats were straining against their moorings. Granite Point, I said. Just made a move they don't understand. And now the panic would begin. There was something in the back that no one expected. I had barely stepped out of the cafe when my phone buzzed again, this time with the unmistakable vibration pattern of an internal crisis alert. Only senior leadership received those. Funny, considering I was no longer leadership. Crisis alert, urgent executive access, disruption detected. Vespera integration channel, locked. Of course it was locked. I was the administrator of that channel. No one thought to reassign permissions before throwing me out of the building. I watched pedestrians move along the waterfront, oblivious to the corporate implosion occurring 12 blocks away. It was almost poetic quiet chaos, wrapped in sunshine. My screen lit up again. Marcel Compliance Clarina. Vespera is asking for the transition ledger. We can't locate the handwritten annotations. Did you archive them outside the system? I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to be cruel, but because the correct answer required a level of competence the current regime did not possess. The annotations were never digitized. They couldn't be. If the legacy liabilities fell into automated systems, Vespera's valuation would swing by a catastrophic margin. Those nuances lived in my coded shorthand 2 notebooks. Now in my bag, to digitize them incorrectly would be a financial and legal Chernobyl. I continued walking. 3 minutes later, another message arrived, this one sharper. Panicked. Owens HR Clarina. Please contact me immediately. The board is requesting clarification on your departure. They were unaware of this decision. That made me stop. Unaware. So Lena hadn't informed them. She'd acted unilaterally drunk on power she didn't understand, swinging termination orders like a child with a toy hammer. I felt a cold, hollow humor settle in my chest. They hadn't just fired the wrong person. They'd violated the key personnel stability clause, which any competent executive knows must be disclosed to the acquiring party. And if it wasn't disclosed, Vespera could void exclusivity. Or worse, they could renegotiate everything at a fraction of the original price. Granite Point hadn't just destabilized a merger. They'd handed Vespera a weapon. My phone rang this time from a blocked number. I answered, Ms. Scott. A low, masculine voice, calm but strained. This is Arthur Colborne, chair of the Granite Point board. I said nothing. Let him fill the silence. We were just informed you were released. He chose the gentlest word possible, a coward's instinct. That is correct, I said. Another silence. Then, were you aware of the key personnel clause attached to the Vespera engagement? I nearly laughed but kept my tone flat. I wrote it. A sharp inhale. Papers were shuffled, whispers exchanged. Ms. Scott, he continued carefully, is it your understanding that your removal jeopardizes compliance with Sections 12C through 14F of the merger? Another direct hit? Yes, I said. It does. A long, painful pause followed. Then the chair spoke words no executive ever wants to utter. Ms. Scott, I believe we have made an error of catastrophic scale. I gazed out at the water, where the tide was slowly pulling back. Arthur, I said quietly, you have no idea how deep it goes. Colborne didn't hang up. Men like him don't end phone calls, they linger, waiting for someone else to offer the lifeline. Clarina, he said slowly, we need you to return to the office immediately. The board requires your assistance in stabilizing the Vespera engagement. Return, I repeated. The word tasted wrong, like spoiled wine. Yes, he continued, voice tightening. We're prepared to authorize full reinstatement, back pay, correction of status. Whatever is necessary. There it was, panic wrapped in polished vocabulary. I'm afraid, I said calmly. That's not possible. He exhaled sharply, as though the wind had been knocked from him. Why not? Because my termination was processed for cause. I reminded him. Your HR systems already logged it. My access credentials are revoked, my clearances canceled. To reinstate me would require a full compliance audit. Silence. He knew exactly what that meant: hours of paperwork, chain of command approvals, and internal disclosures. Hours Granite Point did not have. Finally, he spoke again. Then advise us. Unofficially. No, I said. He bristled. Clarina, this is a multi-billion-dollar operation. I know, I replied. I was the one keeping it upright. A muffled curse came through the line. Probably someone in the boardroom who finally understood the magnitude of Lena's blunder. Ms. Scott, he tried again, voice softening. The Vespera COO has refused to proceed without your written appendices. He claims the valuation cannot be authenticated. That's accurate. And he insists the integration pace will collapse without your asset mapping. That's also accurate. And he... Colborne hesitated. Say it. I encouraged. He said, and I quote, without Clarina, the liabilities become radioactive. A small, cold smile touched my lips. He wasn't wrong. Look, Colborne continued, lowering his voice. Granite Point is trying to avoid a breach of contract filing. We need your guidance. We are willing to compensate you fairly. I walked toward the harbor railing, watching the waves hit the concrete pylons, each one a quiet echo of the panic erupting downtown. You don't need my guidance, I said. You need consequences. Clarina, I cut him off. You didn't just fire me. You broke the trust that supported the entire merger. The Vespera deal was not built on spreadsheets. It was built on relationships you just destroyed. There were whispers again. Someone in the background muttered, We're dead. Colborne cleared his throat. What will it take for you to help us? There it was the question the powerful only ask at the edge of collapse. I let the silence stretch, long enough for every executive in earshot to feel it. Arthur, I said slowly, you fired the interpreter and then set fire to the dictionary. Now you're shocked no one can read. His breath trembled on the line. But I'll tell you this, I added. You have about 6 hours before Vespera formally suspends the merger. What can we do? He asked. I finally turned from the water, my reflection a faint shadow on the glass. That, I said, depends on whether you want repair or reckoning. Colborne didn't answer immediately. When silence stretches that long on a corporate line, it means one thing: everyone in the room is staring at each other, hoping someone else will magically produce a solution. Finally, he spoke. Clarina, we want repair. Of course they did. The powerful always want mercy once the fire reaches their own floor. Then you need to understand something. I said, repair requires competence, and competence isn't something you can conjure by reinstating someone you discarded. I heard a chair scrape. Then a faint voice, the CFO. Rowan Hale, a man who normally spoke like every word cost him personally. Ms. Scott, Hale said, I was unaware of your termination. Had I been notified, you weren't. I interrupted. Because the person responsible didn't understand the consequences of her actions. A collective exhale traveled through the conference speaker. They knew exactly who I meant. Lena has been removed from all decision-making roles, Hale added quickly, almost pleading. Removed. That was fast. Panic is an incredible accelerant. Another voice came on the line, firmer. Colder. This is CEO Damian Mercer, he said. I assure you. Clarina, we are treating the matter with the utmost seriousness. Ah, the uncle. The man who installed Lena. The man who had just realized nepotism had a price tag. What do you want from us? He asked. I leaned against the railing, overlooking the harbor. The wind caught the edge of my coat, lifting it slightly, a quiet reminder of the freedom I now possessed. You need a way to stabilize the valuation before Vespera files an intent to withdraw, I said, and you need someone who can restore trust. That's you, Mercer said. No, I corrected softly. That was me. You removed that option. Silence again. A slow, suffocating silence. Then tell us, Mercer pressed. What is the fastest path to recovery? I considered that question carefully. Not because I wanted to help them, but because I wanted them to understand what they had truly broken. First, I said, you must disclose my termination to Vespera immediately. Legally, you don't have a choice. That will destabilize the merger. Hale objected. It already is destabilized. I replied, you can't hide a structural collapse by closing the blinds. A quiet groan moved across the boardroom. Second, I continued, you need to find someone who can interpret the handwritten appendices and recalibrate your integration map. And who is that? Mercer asked. I let a slow breath fill the space. No one in your building. The weight of those 6 words hit like falling steel. Colborne swore under his breath. So you're saying, Hale murmured, the only interpreter of the liabilities is gone. Correct. Mercer exhaled sharply, voice tightening. Clarina, will you consider contracting with us? I smiled faintly, not that anyone could see it, but they could hear it in the pause. You're asking the person you fired, I said, to rescue the deal you destroyed. Yes, Mercer admitted. We are. A flock of gulls passed overhead, their shadows slicing across the water like drifting shards. I'll consider it, I said at last. Relief swept through the line, but on my terms. I added. The relief died instantly. The line went utterly still. Executives are not accustomed to hearing the phrase on my terms. They're used to negotiating from towers built on longevity, legacy, and shareholder capital. But in that moment, they knew none of those things could translate the handwritten map they'd just destroyed. Clarina, CEO Mercer said carefully, what exactly are your terms? I didn't answer immediately. Let them sit in the discomfort. Let them feel their dependence. Power, after all, isn't in the demand, it's in the silence before it. You're asking me to step into a collapsing structure. I finally said, before I agree to anything, I need to understand the ground I'd be standing on. That's reasonable, Hale replied. What do you need perfect? First, I said, I want transparency. Full access to internal communications from the last 48 hours related to my termination and the Vespera engagement. A faint choking sound came through, probably someone who realized what that would expose. Second, I want a written statement from the board acknowledging that my termination violated procedural compliance. That's unprecedented, Mercer muttered. So was firing the architect of your merger over a dress code fantasy. No one argued. Third, I continued, Lena Mercer is not to contact me, not directly, not through intermediaries, not through documentation requests. She is removed from all channels connected to this deal. That's already been done, Colborne said. She's suspended pending review. Good. But suspension was merely administrative. I wasn't finished. And lastly, I said, lowering my voice, I want indemnity from any fallout resulting from your leadership's failure to disclose personnel disruption to Vespera. The line collectively inhaled. You're asking for immunity, Hale said. No, I corrected. I'm asking not to be blamed for a fire I didn't start. A beat passed. Then Mercer exhaled slowly. If we agree to these terms, will you help us salvage the merger? I considered the question not for theatrics, but because I genuinely needed to measure one thing. Were they seeking repair? Or an escape route before I decide? I said, I need information. What information? Mercer asked. When did Vespera last contact you directly, and what was their tone? Hale shuffled papers. They called twice. Once at 10, once at 12:30. The second call was less cordial. Define less cordial, they asked. Hale said, voice tightening, whether the company had lost its mind. Reasonable. And did they mention walking away? I asked. They didn't use those words. Hale replied, but they said, and I quote, we are evaluating our options. Cold clarity moved through me. Evaluating options was Vespera's diplomatic way of saying the deal was already halfway out the door. Very well, I said. Send me the documents I requested. I'll review them. A collective sigh of relief swept across the connection. But understand something, I added. If the damage is worse than you've admitted, no one, not even me, may be able to pull you out. Mercer didn't flinch this time. We understand. I ended the call. The files arrived quickly, far quicker than any budget, promotion, or ethics complaint in the company's history. Desperation has a way of accelerating processes that once took weeks. I took the documents to a quiet bench along the waterfront and began reading, letting the waves and distant traffic form a steady hum beneath the chaos unfolding on my screen. The first email thread was a masterpiece of arrogance. Lena had announced without consulting a single department that she had neutralized a cultural obstacle in the integration pipeline. Neutralized, as though my absence were a form of pest control. Another thread documented her attempt to streamline the liabilities mapping by deleting sections she didn't understand. Those sections weren't clutter, they were structural supports, environmental clauses, territorial boundaries, legacy IP triggers. Removing them didn't simplify the deal. It set off a chain reaction of internal contradictions the system couldn't reconcile. Then I reached the compliance log. Unverified edits detected in the Vespera asset chain. Pending confirmation. Source L. Mercer verification attempt. Failed. Access level mismatch. Naturally, she didn't have the clearance. Instead of accepting that reality, she attempted to brute force her way into restricted fields until the system locked her out entirely. A chat transcript with IT captured the moment perfectly, Lena demanding to be added to the hierarchy. IT explaining that clearances aren't created by ego. Lena insisting her title should override protocol. IT ending the chat when she began issuing commands she had no authority to give. The digital equivalent of a toddler kicking a locked door. But the real damage was in the call summaries. Vespera had reached out twice. They were confused why their liaison had vanished. They were alarmed when Lena attempted to speak on my behalf. And they were furious when she failed to explain even the basics of the transition roadmap. Elias Vesper's note was clipped. Professional. An unmistakably irritated replacement unable to answer structural questions. Requested immediate clarification. Tone deteriorating. Then came the bombshell, an internal memo from legal, stating the company might have breached the key personnel stability clause and needed to disclose my termination promptly. Disclosure never happened. Instead, leadership chose denial, always the sign of people who believe consequences can be avoided if ignored long enough. Emails from HR showed panicked backpedaling. Messages from the board revealed ignorance, outrage, and fear in equal measure. One executive wrote, "With admirable precision, we cannot repair what we do not understand." Exactly. And they had just fired the only person who did understand. The final document was Lena's draft summary for the board. The opening line read, "The situation is under control." I closed the file slowly, letting the absurdity wash over me. Nothing was under control, not the merger. Not the leadership, not even the narrative. The board summoned me before I even decided whether to help them. A single message appeared on my phone, short, clipped, almost pleading. "We request your presence at headquarters." Urgent. Presence. Not assistance. Presence. They didn't want a consultant. They wanted a savior they could scold later. Still, I walked toward Granite Point Tower. Not out of loyalty, but out of curiosity, like revisiting the scene of a crime after knowing the fingerprints left behind were not yours. The lobby was a storm disguised as marble and glass. Executives paced, security whispered, analysts typed with the frantic desperation of interns on their last day. Eyes flicked toward me as I entered shock, guilt, hope, fear, all mixing into a silence so brittle it might shatter if someone exhaled too loudly. Hail? The CFO rushed toward me first. "Clarina, thank God," he muttered. "We're in a full meltdown." Meltdown was an understatement. The company looked like a skyscraper whose foundations had just been declared unsafe. "What does Vespera know so far?" I asked. Hale grimaced. "Enough. They've halted all data exchange. They said they won't proceed until their trusted liaison is present. Trusted liaison, even now." They were clearer than the people who had fired me. We entered the elevator together, on the ascent. I noticed Hale's hand trembling slightly. Numbers lit up overhead. But all I could think was how unpredictable elevation becomes when the structural beams below you have been compromised. The doors opened on the executive floor. It felt colder not physically, but atmospherically. A room stripped of certainty. The entire board sat waiting. Colborne stood when I entered, his expression a painful mix of regret and necessity. "Ms. Scott," he said, gesturing to the head of the table. Please take a seat. I didn't move. You dismissed me from this position yesterday. I replied. It would be odd to sit where I'm no longer permitted. A few members winced. The CEO, Mercer, cleared his throat. Clarina, let's put pride aside. We need you. That word again. Need. What exactly do you expect me to do? I asked. Mercer clasped his hands together. Vespera is threatening to suspend negotiations indefinitely. We need you to speak with them, reassure them, restore the framework, rebuild the liabilities mapping. I waited. That last part mattered. And you want me to fix the internal compliance breaches? I added. Yes, Mercer admitted. You're the only person who can. There it was, the truth spoken aloud. Finally freed from ego's grasp. The moment you fired me, I said coldly. You removed the only translator this merger had. The deal isn't falling apart because Vespera is unstable. It's falling apart because you are... Hale closed his eyes, absorbing the blow. What will it take? Colborne asked quietly. This time I stepped forward not to sit, but to ensure every one of them heard me clearly. If I take on this rescue, I said, I don't return as your employee. Silence thickened. I return as your equal, or I don't return at all. The boardroom absorbed my words like a shockwave. Equality wasn't something they offered ever. Not to partners, not to directors, and certainly not to someone they believed they could discard 24 hours earlier. Colborne leaned forward, fingers steepled. Define equal. I define it by authority. I replied, if I'm going to salvage a multi-billion-dollar merger you've already driven into a wall, I do it with full strategic control. That means unrestricted access. That means my recommendations aren't advisory. They are implemented. Mercer stiffened. That places you above multiple departments. No, I corrected. It places me above incompetence. Hale let out a breath that was half laugh, half defeat. Some part of him knew this was the only path left. And compensation, Colborne asked. I want parity with executive-level decision-makers. I said simply, no more, no less. Another ripple through the room. Mercer finally spoke, voice quieter now. If we agree, will you stabilize the merger? I held his gaze. Behind his eyes was not confidence, but fear. They all knew Vespera wouldn't wait much longer. They all knew the market was already sniffing weakness. I'll do more than stabilize it. I said, I'll rebuild the trust you shattered. But understand this, my allegiance is not to Granite Point's ego. It's to the truth of the deal. Colborne nodded slowly. Then we accept your terms. For the first time since my firing. The room felt still. Not peaceful, just momentarily aligned. Like a building that had stopped shaking, but had not yet been declared safe. I turned toward the door. Prepare the disclosure, I said. I'll speak with Vespera once it's filed. As I stepped into the hallway, Hale called after me. Clarina, can we come back from this? I didn't turn. That depends, I said softly. On whether you've learned what happens when you underestimate the person holding the foundation together. And then I walked away, not returning to my old role, but stepping into one I had outgrown long ago. I realized the real lesson wasn't the merger, it was remembering my worth, when others tried to erase it. Sometimes losing a position means gaining your power back. If you were in my place, would you have chosen a different ending, and where are you listening from today? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if this story spoke to you. Thank you for being here. See you in the next story.